So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about Hidden River Cave. And Hidden River Cave is a pretty significant cave system that's located in Horse Cave, Kentucky. Okay, and what I'm showing you right now, it's just a Google Earth image. Horse Cave is here, Cave City is here, Bowling Green is way down there somewhere. And so in this yellow thing, we'll get to see a little bit more close-up of that. So when you go to Hidden River Cave, and let me zoom out a little bit here. This is not exactly how I plan to do it, but this is how I'm going to do it. There's obviously multiple ways to get in. Most people come in on I-65, and that sign that I showed you was I-65. And pretty much what you do is you drive into this beautiful karst, and all these green-looking fuzzy hills, these are actually remnants of some of the plateau, the Chester Escarpment, that used to hold, well, that still does hold a lot of caves, including Mammoth Cave. In this part of the basin, they're a little bit more eroded down, which is why you don't have quite extensive a cave as you do at Mammoth Cave. And here's an example of, talk about geology, because actually the geology is one of the reasons why this is such a big issue. And this is Chelsea Ballard. Chelsea was wonderful yesterday and the day before. She helped me do all this video, all this photography, and she would probably be crying right now if she knew that I'm not showing it. But anyway, she's standing in front of an outcrop of rock, and this is the typical limestone that you see around here. This is called the St. Genevieve limestone, and many of the cave systems are formed in the St. Genevieve and the St. Louis limestone. So if you're a geologist, you know what you're looking at. If you're not a geologist, I'll explain real quick. Basically, you know, think of this as someone drilled a hole somewhere and then they looked at what the rocks look like in cross section. So if you were to make a real generalized picture of what they look like around here, this is kind of what it would look like. And you've got a bunch of sediment up here. You've got a lot. I won't explain what all this is, because what's important is right in here. And these are all the limestones that, well, it's the limestone that Mammoth Cave is formed in, and any big cave system in this area is either, it usually goes from the Gherkin, the St. Genevieve, and the St. Louis. Hidden River Cave is formed mostly in the St. Louis. And this is kind of a cartoon to give you a better idea of the plumbing of the area. Even though this says Mammoth Cave, the plumbing around here is similar. What's different is that here all the knobs have been eroded away and they're just remnants of them. And so all this stuff, except for a little bit, a tiny bit of limestone or sandstone, would be gone. And so what happens is this whole area here collects water. It's a sinkhole plain. The water sinks into the limestone because limestone dissolves in water, and rainwater is slightly acidic, especially when it goes through soil. And it flows through these formations, and it ultimately flows to the Green River. At least in this area, it flows to the Green River. And the river has, you know, risen and fallen, you know, in its very long history, and that's why you get all these different levels of cave. But the basic plumbing that you see here in Mammoth Cave is pretty much the same as what you get at Hidden River Cave. So this is a kind of an old diagram, but it's still a relevant one, of what's called a karst groundwater basin. And so just like on the surface, you can have a basin where wherever it rains, all the elevation kind of points down, say toward the low point. That's what a catchment, I guess you could say, is on the surface. In limestone, your basins are underground. You can't see them. And there's a whole series of them. So where we are, hopefully you can see my little pointer. This is the area of interest that we are right here. And this is called the Gorham Mill groundwater basin. Mammoth Cave is like over here. So Mammoth Cave is like really, really close to the Gorham Mill Basin. And notice it says Bowling Green here. If we were to continue to go west, we would end up in the Graham Springs Basin and in the Lost River Basin. So this whole area here, if you look closely at this map, you'll see all these squiggly lines, and then they all end right here. And all those squiggly lines are little creeks and rivers and streams, and they end where the limestone is most, most porous, I guess I could say. So the reason why this is important is because this is the reason why this is the physical reason that allowed this ecological disaster to happen. And so let me get back to Google Earth here. So basically, here's the Green River, all right? And the Green River is fed by many, many karst springs, okay? And I'll talk a little bit about those as well. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see that this nice, beautiful green area, this is Mammoth Cave. This is Mammoth Cave National Park. And the Green River flows right through the park and then out. It also flows from, well, it flows from quite a way, but it flows across the karst, and it's like the base level. It's where all the streams aim to go when they're when it rains a lot. But what you also have, notice I have all these roads here. Well, obviously that's only some of the infrastructure that is in this area, and I'm going to turn them off now because they're just in the way. So this is Horse Cave here, and this is Cave City here, okay? And Horse Cave and Cave City almost share the same groundwater basin. And the distance between these, this is like 5 or 6 miles. And this is a huge, huge basin. Another thing that is important to note, and I'm going to have to zoom really close in for you to see that, is you notice there's a lot of development. People live here, obviously. But there's also a lot of industry here. And so this whole swath of stuff here, these are factories, different kinds of factories. There's metal plating, there's container making, styrofoam container. There's a salad dressing making place here. So you have all these industries that are sitting on top of a sinkhole plain. And what a sinkhole plain is it's a big like limestone surface that has a lot of sinkholes in it. And when water goes into the sinkholes, it eventually takes them to the cave. Or anything that happens to go into the sinkhole takes them to the cave. And that's where the story kind of starts. And the story doesn't start recently. The story started, 100 years ago, probably. And so at one time, the people of Horse Cave used to get all their drinking water. By the way, this is Hidden River Cave, and this is what it looks like on a surface overlay. And if you notice, it goes right under a whole bunch of factory buildings. It also goes right through, and then it looks like it ends here, but it doesn't really, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So what happened is that when people first moved in the area, and this would be like in the 17 and 1800s, they got their water from the cave. You could actually walk into the cave entrance, not necessarily an easy walk, but if you needed water, and there's not a lot of water around here, especially in a normal summer, you're going to walk down with a bucket and get you some water. And so for years, people would get their water from the cave. And then, let's see, in about the 1930s, they decided they went with municipal water instead. And the reason they did that is because they had a big drought, and it was such a significant drought that it even dried out the water in the cave. And so now this reliable source wasn't reliable anymore. And so they built a water treatment plant, and they drilled a bunch of wells, and they started using municipal water. So they were not depending on the cave very much for water anymore. But as the town continued to grow, so did the industry continue to grow. And at that time, people did not realize that if you put something in a sinkhole, then it actually will eventually end up in the Green River. This was like a concept that, it was something that no one had ever even thought of before. And it wasn't until the 1970s that a geologist named Jim Quinlan, who was the Mammoth Cave Park hydrologist, he was the one that kind of broke open the whole idea of the fact that these underground waters, that sinkholes lead to underground waters, which could lead to a drinking water source, which goes to the Green River. Ultimately, the municipal water comes from the Green River, ultimately. So it's not like they escape they escape drinking from the cave. But for years, people were, industry was dumping their waste into the cave. Metal treating plant was dumping their waste in the cave. A creamery was dumping creamery wastes. There was agricultural waste. And ultimately what happened, one of the big reasons why people quit using the cave as a drinking source is because it literally became a sewer. Like you know what a sewer smells like. And the first time I came to this area was in the mid 1975s. Well, it was 1975. And I did some volunteer work for this Dr. Quinlan. And at the time, he had sent us out on a water collecting run one day, and we were supposed to go to Hidden River Cave, and none of us had been there before. And we asked him, well, where's the cave? And he says, you'll know when you get there. And so before we even got into town, we could smell the cave. It was so, so, so awful. And we went into the sinkhole, and I have pictures of the cave. We're going to take a little tour of the cave as well. We went into the sinkhole, collected the water samples. There was nothing living in the stream except these stringy red things, which we learned later are bloodworms. And bloodworms thrive on sewage. And so that's what was in the stream. Whatever was living in the cave before, at least wasn't living in there at that time. So what Dr. Quinlan did was he did a big water quality study. He went and sampled waters at the springs because his idea was that all the water from town and that everybody was dumping into the sinkhole plain, his hypothesis was that it was going to come out on the Green River. So what he did was he started looking for springs on the Green River, and he found a lot of springs. As a matter of fact, in this particular area, he found like 45 different springs, which he thought were different springs. This, by the way, I put it in here a little bit too early, but this railroad track goes right through the middle of Horse Cave, and it goes right on top of Hidden River Cave. And so when you're in the cave, if you're on a cave tour and you happen to be there when the train is coming, you can hear the train. But that's not the reason I put this slide up there, and I'll explain that later. So what Quinlan discovered was that all these springs on the river, especially the ones that were close to a big spring named Gorin Mill, they were all polluted, like terrifically polluted. And here is the Green River, and all these little circles, which you can't see really well because my wonderful graphic doesn't exist anymore, are all springs in this area. There's springs all over the place, all over the river here. But here there's a very big concentration of them. And so what he did was he determined that he had kind of proof that what was happening on the surface was making it into the groundwater. Now, even though people were not drinking their water directly from the cave, they were drinking water from some springs across the river from the cave, and they were getting their water from the river as well. Well, if all the springs flow into the river, you still have a problem. You still have a big problem. All these dots here are municipal wells that they drilled. And when they drilled these wells, they didn't encounter any caves. I mean, they didn't expect to, and they didn't. And it's because those wells are relatively shallow. And so another thing that Dr. Quinlan did was he sampled all these wells too, and none of them were polluted. So what was happening is the groundwater was flowing from, Cave City to Horse Cave, all this agricultural area, all the water was sinking into the sinkholes, and it was flowing under all the wells, and it was coming out on the Green River in about 43 different springs. And that's called a distributary spring system. And this is, it doesn't look like it right now, but this is Gorin Mill. Actually, there's a person for scale. And this spring has the most water coming out of it, the highest discharge than any spring in the state of Kentucky. So this is Gormill Spring. Um, Even more than any of the springs that drain Mammoth Cave as well. Of course, Mammoth Cave has multiple big springs that drain it. But here's one conduit, one point, which is, draining a very big swath of the surface. And so here is an aerial photo, and the Green River is right, you can kind of see it right here. You can see these little loops. That's the Green River. These little red dots are springs, and these are only some of the springs on the Green River. All these yellow lines are all the traces of dye tracing that Dr. Quinlan did, where what he did was he put non-toxic fluorescein dye into a bunch of sinkholes and sinking streams up here, and he found the dye in these springs. And so that's how he could confirm that his hypothesis was absolutely true. And this green line that surrounds all this is all what we think is the boundaries of the groundwater basin, of the Gorham Mill groundwater basin. It's pretty huge. It's like, I think it's like 800 square miles or something like that. It's crazy. Or maybe square kilometers. Whatever it is, it's pretty big. And it's not the only basin, because right next to it, this is a Mammoth Cave basin. These are more karst basins on this side as well. So as you can see, if your land use is putting polluted water into the ground, well, then you're going to pollute all the conduits, and ultimately you're going to pollute the river. And so why should you care about some old cave that's got water flowing through it? Well, the cave is also habitat to endangered species, and even some not so endangered species. And at one time there was like no sign of life in Hidden River Cave except bloodworms. It's all this years of polluting the cave, which has pretty much killed off all the wildlife, or at least it did. So what happened was, once Quinlan convinced the administration of these areas that they needed to do something, because otherwise they're basically poisoning their groundwater, what happened is that they discovered that the creamery plant was dumping their waste directly into a sinkhole. The metal plating plant was dumping their stuff into a sinkhole. And all the springs on the Green River were spewing water that had heavy metals in it, and also very high bacterial counts, which is why that was like killing everything in the water. And so what the locals did was, what the local administration did was, they pretty much fined everybody for dumping stuff in sinkholes, because you're really not supposed to dump stuff in sinkholes. They built a new water treatment plant, because the old water treatment plant, part of the problem was it didn't work. And they didn't realize that it was ineffective. So they thought, well, we're getting our water treated, but not really. And so after about 5 or 6 years, it really didn't take very long at all, the stench around the city went away. And so the first time I saw it was in 1975. And I came back in 1988 or whatever. Yes, I think it was about then. And not only could you not smell sewage anymore, but the cave was like teeming with cave life. There were white cavefish, there were white crayfish. There was a section of the cave, and let me get a little bit to the cave map so that you can see what I'm talking about. So here is Hidden River Cave. This little red dot here is the ACCA Museum. ACCA is American Cave Conservation Association. And what happened was they ended up buying this entrance to the cave, and then they do a lot of remediation, local remediation. They do a lot of education to try to maintain, the fact that the cave is cleaned up now. Because, it's kind of, you have to be, if you talk to their director, Dave Foster, he says you have to be ever vigilant, because there's always somebody trying to like sneak something in a sinkhole thinking that not anyone is going to know about it. I think the latest big find that anybody had was in 2010, where another metal treating plant was directly putting their effluent in the sinkhole. The thing is that these guys are like watchdogs. If there's anything unusual going on, because they run tours in the cave. So Hidden River Cave, at least the beginning, the surface or the entrance parts of it is a tour cave. This is the entrance right here. And all these little squiggly lines, this is a big sinkhole. These are all just survey lines that are delineating the limit of the sinkhole. If you walk through town, you could stand here and look down into and it's about 60 feet deep. This is a big, huge slope, and I'm going to show you some pictures of it. And it comes to this nice junction. And so I will zoom out a little bit. So this part of the cave carries a stream, and this part of the cave, the stream it's still there, but it's inaccessible. And what people think, what biologists think, is that this is a refugia, which means that when everything else got poisoned, this particular area was a little bit higher than everything else, so it wasn't seeing all the direct groundwater. And so that's how the cave got repopulated again. That all the critters that were hiding out because it was too poisonous not to, started venturing out into the stream. And even today, if you go into see white cavefish, you'll see white crayfish, there's crickets, there's just all sorts of stuff there. This part of the cave was only known till about here, until the late 80s. And then somebody found a little passage and boom, it exploded out into this area. And this is called the Schoolhouse Maze, and I was one of the people that came and mapped and discovered and mapped this area. And we called this the Schoolhouse Maze because there's so many white cavefish in there. It was just amazing. And back here, this is another interesting area. It's very difficult to get back here, by the way. The crayfish that were living here, well, they look like lobsters. A lot of them were surface crayfish, so obviously there's more ways into the cave that people can't fit. And this thing that looks like it ends here, what it is all the water, so there's a river in this cave, it all flows toward this place right here, and it sumps. And what that means is that the passage becomes filled with water, and it's not passable unless you were a scuba diver or a cave diver. And the reason why cave divers haven't been there is because the route is very ugly. It would be very terrible. But so this is called Horse Hall, and we named it in honor of Horse Cave. It's a very big room, and there's a big sediment bank in Horse Hall. And there had been rumors at one time that there was an accident with one of the trains coming through town, that the train actually derailed, and the train had a bunch of well, it had Agent Orange. It happened in 1966. The train derailed. This little red dot here, by the way, because for a long time that was a story that was kind of like, wasn't really talked about a lot. And it was like, it's just a rumor. It's just an urban legend, right? Well, what happened is that this became a Superfund site. And a Superfund site means it's highly toxic area, and this one they didn't really talk about a lot because of the Agent Orange. And one of the things that we did here was we collected sediment from a big like sediment bank, and we had it analyzed, and the lower parts of the sediment, because you have to like drill a little hole to pull out a little core, had remnants of Agent Orange in it, so it was not a lie at all. And as you can see, this is where the train derailed, right here. Here's the sinkhole, okay, which it's been remediated, okay, which means that they cleaned it up. But the Agent Orange is still buried deep in the sediment, but it's still there. And so obviously there's more conduit that people haven't found yet that went from here to here, okay. And this cave passage has all sorts of other little tributaries that have not been totally documented yet. So anyway, so that's this part of Hidden River Cave. Let me go back to my slides because there is still more to this story. Let's just do a little tour of Hidden River Cave. And if you were to drive into downtown Horse Cave, this is what you'd see on the main drag. And basically, this is their whole operation. The cave is back here, and I think I've got a picture of the cave somewhere. This is the entrance. It's a very beautiful entrance. This is also an archaeologic site, and when they developed this, they didn't really know that. Although at the time, I don't know if that would have made a difference. But it's an archaeologic site, so obviously Native Americans frequented the place because they find evidence. They find arrowheads. They find other, little bits and pieces of things that the only, it had to have been Native Americans. And as you can see, it's kind of, so from here to the bottom is 60 feet. So because there's no one in here for scale, so that you can see what I'm talking about. And we're going to go follow that and see where it goes. It goes into very big cave passage. Okay. And all this stuff, this is all sediment bank. So there's a river, right now it's a stream that flows here, and the water gets so high in this cave, like at least up to here, that it deposits all this sediment, and then it downcuts itself as it continues to flow. We have a couple of monitoring sites in the cave because we're kind of doing a study of the groundwater, and we really don't know, nobody really knows how much water goes through this part of the cave, and so part of our study is going to be to look at that. This is in the upstream part of the cave. This is somebody drilled a well. It's like, what's that? This is not a water well. This is a well that people were using to dump trash or to dump sewage into the cave at one time. So the well is still there. They don't dump sewage anymore. But what you will find in this entire area is you find little white like spheres of styrofoam. And all that comes from DART, because DART makes styrofoam. So even though they quit, whoever was dumping, even though you quit dumping years ago, the stuff is still there. It doesn't totally go away. It's kind of under control right now, but you never know. So this is the Hidden River entrance, and normally you would walk down these steps. There's 166 steps here, and that junction that I showed you in the map, this is where it is. If you get enough rain, this and this is the same place. So this cave actively, it's an active underground river. And if it really gets extreme, this is like almost to the top, it completely almost sealed the cave shut. And this water is, some of it is coming from like the Cave City area where I showed you on the map before. But there's another, so it looks like the water might be coming from this direction, but the water that flows through this part of the cave is nowhere near the volume or the discharge that's coming from the bottom of this breakdown pile. It's the entrance. So at one time, this cave extended in this direction. There's another cave here somewhere. We know it's there. I mean, people have explored it, found it. They dye traced it, and they put dye in it and found that it came into this cave. So there's a remnant of this cave that's not been found yet. People haven't found a way to get into it. But obviously it goes right through town. Okay. So there's no escaping that, anything that happens is always going to affect the cave. Go out a little bit more. There's another cave here. It's called L&N Cave. L&N as in like the railroad L&N. And it's really important cave because it too has been dye traced to Hidden River, although nobody's found a direct route yet. So that cave goes, it's been mapped from this red dot to this red dot, and that's what remains to be connected. However, this area, this cave doesn't end, but it's very like low and nasty and wet and muddy and terrible, and so nobody's made the physical connection yet. But you can see that, that your influence of, human impact goes quite a ways when you think that this is probably like 6 or 7 miles. And all the drainage here, it's all underground. And what you see here is just some of the underground that's been found. There's a lot more of it. So let's go to our next. So, I I need to start back here again. That manhole cover that I just showed you is here. That's located right here. And this is another cave, and it's called the Hidden River Complex. And when Dr. Quinlan was doing his study on the Green River, when he was monitoring these springs, dye tracing, doing chemical analysis of the water, he predicted that there had to be another big cave system here. And so during the summer, he hired teams of cave explorers to work with him, because all the work was underground, and they're the ones that like to go underground. And so I happened to be on one of those teams one day, and it had been really dry, and so it was a good time to go and look for springs on the river. And so I and another person went, and we were digging around in some of the springs that I showed you a picture of. And one of them actually broke into very big cave passage. And, one thing, I wish I could show you this, but there is a 20-mile cave system in here. And the first 14 miles of it was mapped in the summer of 1975. And so, because it was just like, once you broke through to get into one of these little conduits, it just broke through into big cave everywhere. And so, but this cave, the biggest cave, Gora Mill, is here somewhere. And it doesn't directly drain, this area. It does it indirectly. So there's some other big conduit here that nobody's found yet. So if you're a cave explorer, those kind of things are really exciting. So what I have here is, here's the entrance. This is called the War entrance. And the reason why this entrance was drilled, because to go from the river to the end of exploration in Hidden River Complex, or Hicks was another name for it, was like 6 or 8 hours one way of hiking and crawling and swimming in a cave. And this cave is very susceptible to flooding. You saw how Hidden River floods. And so what Dr. Quinlan did was he commissioned a well, or basically that's what it is. He had somebody come in, drill a large diameter hole, and then they cased it, put a ladder in it, and now that is another way into the Hidden River Complex. And the Hidden River Complex is pretty extensive. It's got I have a few pictures. There are not a lot of pictures of this cave because it's kind of muddy and it's very wet. In some places it's swimming wet. After all, it's a natural drain. But it also has some areas that are very nicely decorated as well. And so I think that might be my last slide. And before I take any questions, let me go back to this. So basically, by cleaning up the land use and what people were doing land use wise, that was the things that worked very well for remediating that disaster that was in the cave. So they turned the sewer into a nice, natural, beautiful natural system again. But there are people on the sinkhole plain that are still trying to sneak dumping things in sinkholes, and all these little like circles that you see everywhere. There are thousands of sinkholes here. It's just amazing. The surface is totally leaky. And so, you have to be careful not to dump stuff in there. There's a hospital right here. You have to be careful, right? You don't want to dump, if you're a hospital, you don't want to put medical waste into the cave. And look at how the cave almost goes, well, L&M comes up to here. So basically it comes almost to there. And as the ACCA director says, it's a constant battle to always keep an eye on things. There's always some, I've been in there where there's like something smells like salad dressing this week. And suspiciously, there's a salad dressing plant that's, not very far away. I think the salad dressing plant is like right here somewhere. So, I guess the lesson in karst is that anything that happens on the surface is going to eventually get underground. But the good thing is that, even if, it can still be remediated. But that doesn't mean that you clean it up and then you can, it's done and you can keep dumping stuff in there again. That's not at all true. If they didn't have laws and fines and whatever, this cave would still be very, very polluted because it costs a lot of money to try to not, well, to try to put your waste somewhere other than in your backyard. So let me go back to here. So are there any questions? Nobody has any questions. Either that or put everybody to sleep.
Hey Pat, it's Marissa. I don't know if you can. I just turned my video on. I don't know if you could see me or not.
I'm gonna move now. I can see you. Yes.
Hello.
Hi.
I got a question. So you were talking about near that Superfund site where they dumped the Agent Orange. You said you were taking sediment samples. Is there ever an opportunity for, I guess, remobilization of that sediment? I know the caves flood a lot, and I've been down to Hidden River Cave a number of times now. And is that a potential like threat, or is it kind of like a lake? You just don't try not to disturb the sediment, and it'll be okay. Because I mean, probably a lot of those sediments, I would say, are contaminated with probably heavy metals and all that other stuff that had been dumped in there for years.
Well, anything that obviously there's probably a lot that's already been flushed out to the river, but there's also a lot that's still there. But because sediment continues to get deposited, then it gets buried. So it's still there, it's just buried. And so if you were to go to that part of the cave, your chances of wallowing around in it are not very good because it was 1966. The cave has flooded a lot. So, but you could, I mean, if it happened like 3 weeks ago, heck yeah, because the sediment, all the contaminant is right there on the surface. There was a farm in the area, and I believe the guy who owned the farm ended up dying of cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, and his wife was trying to sue, and people were, that's why they kept it a secret, because they didn't want everyone to know that they just dumped a whole bunch of Agent Orange into a sinkhole. That's not good PR for your company.
Right.
Yeah.
Have they done any studies of like the Green River to see whether the sediments there are contaminated from all this water that had come through there, or?
At the time, obviously not, because as far as recently, people have done studies in Hidden River Cave recently where they've looked at the sediment, and basically the stuff persists in there. They've even been able to date some of the sediment to figure out, how long it took it to deposit. So it deposits pretty fast. So that's the good thing, is that it buries it. It doesn't take it all away though, which is, I've been to Hidden River Cave a lot of, many, many times. And so I don't consider it a dangerous scenario. Some people do, but I don't think it is because it's pretty much buried.
Yeah.
In more ways than one. Other questions?
You have one in chat from Dyer SB. Any perspective on what state of caves would have been in without the refuge cave that repopulated? Any cases you know of that might be indicative?
You mean like other caves that have done that? Is that what the question? You can unmute yourself and just ask me, whoever it is. We know for a fact that there are refugia, and we've seen examples of that, like in Hawaii, for example. The lava in lava tubes, there's all sorts of stuff going on in lava tubes, and because they're so porous, your cave critters, some of them are small enough that they can just walk through the pore space and never actually come out into a big void. There's many examples of refugia, not only in caves, but in other areas too. Like if you've ever heard of, what are they called? They're called fen slopes, where they're big piles of rock and they maintain a really cool temperature. And what they find is that some of the animals that inhabit those have been around since the Pleistocene, when the it kind of maintains that same climate. So the whole idea of refugia is it's not like all that unusual, Any cave that I've seen that's been impacted, if they clean it up, the animals come back. It's not like you killed them off forever. Sometimes what they'll do is they can live like under the stream, under, not only under the water but in the sediment, or they don't need a lot, they just need a little rock alcove somewhere that's kind of away from the worst of the stuff. But so, did I answer your question? Either that or I confused the heck out of you.
Well, Pat, I have a question. I mean, kind of in relation to this, and I think this is a really interesting thing to think about. And I'm glad that, I'm sorry, I don't know who this person is, but Dyer brought it up. I know there are species that live in the epikarst as well, like in the whole, column, of the subsurface. And I wonder if there are certain species, I don't know. I mean, obviously that maybe could have been retained, above that kind of, I guess, like they did in the stream, but could that happen in other areas, I guess, throughout the, yeah.
As a matter of fact, there's an example of it in Crump's Cave, WKU's Crump's Cave. And they had a biologic inventory done once by Jerry Lewis, who is kind of a well-known cave biologist. And some of the traps that he was putting out, he was putting them like under holes in the ceiling, and he was catching stuff. So there, stuff lives in the epikarst, and the epikarst is kind of like the skin, I guess you could say, of the actual, like, as water comes in the surface, it like dissolves all these little channels, and so it's very like porous up there, and that intersects these cave passages. But animals live in there, and they're actually kind of, and that could certainly be a refugia as well. And so Jerry Lewis has documented it definitely in Crump's Cave. No other questions? Oh, come on, ask me a question. Anybody.
So I've talked with Dave Foster. He seems to think that the Hidden River system might connect into Mammoth. What is your take on that? Because I don't know. I think maybe he's just being optimistic, but I don't know anything. I've only been here for a few months.
Oh, well, I know Dave well enough to know he's pulling your leg in a big way. However,
That's it. Yeah, it's the sense I got.
it's not impossible when he says that. When you say connecting a cave, what does that really mean? It can mean a couple of things. It could mean that people could actually pass through it in some way, or it means that the water could be connected even though people can't go through it. And so the Gore and Mill Basin is like right up against some of the Mammoth Cave basins. And what happens in Karst is that when you get a lot of rain, the water level rises, and there's nowhere for it to go because it's in a cave, and it flows into adjacent basins. So you could very well have stuff in Gore and Mill Basin possibly flowing into any of the Mammoth Cave basins. On the side by, what is it? The Graham Springs Basin, which is in Bowling Green, it also abuts the Mammoth Cave on one side, and it's been speculated that when there's rain, when there's big, storm events, that the water intermingles. So the water could connect. Maybe we can't connect it, but the water can connect it. So he was sort of pulling your leg. If you haven't figured out, Dave, I had a great video of him before I lost it all, but yeah, he likes to joke.
No, I do. I don't know. He seemed rather genuine on that front, but
well, if water-wise, they probably do.
yeah.
So
well, most things do with the water anyhow.
Yeah. Other questions?
I want to say, who's ready to go survey?
Me, take me, a volunteer.
I always love Pat's presentations because, one of my very first caving events, Pat, that I went to was Speleo Fest many, many years ago. And your presentation was about how there was easily 500 more miles of cave. And I think, that's so energizing. This is a great example of, urban karst challenges and restoration, but also you know, you always pull in that exploration aspect and how important it is, you know, into managing these systems. So thank you for that inspiration too.
Well, you know, you also have to keep in mind, I mean, when when we say, ah, we're scientists, yeah, we're the scientists, we go study stuff. Well, if it wasn't for the cave explorers, the scientists wouldn't know what to study. I mean, it's people going out and exploring, finding, exploring, and then not only that, but also mapping them. Because if you didn't map it, if you didn't map Hidden River Cave or the Hidden River Complex, you'd have no idea, you know, what was going on underfoot. And so, but you know, to get somebody to do that, mapping is not, as Leanne probably knows, is not all that glamorous a lot of times. Sometimes it's just like, you know, not fun. It's not fun until it's over. And then you look back on it and say, oh, I think that was fun. But, you know, just like anything,
Well, and I
like
think,
running a marathon.
sorry, I was
That's,
just saying that I think Dave said for part of the reason that some areas hadn't been surveyed because of the pollution, because it was just dangerous to enter certain areas of the cave.
mm, well, you know, he knows the cave better than anybody because, you know, he's been there for 30 years. And he could be right about that. Um, it's also to get to the end of exploration is like, it's kind of a long trip and it's very unpleasant. Once you get to the place where the leads are, it's nice, but getting there is not. And of course, you know, why would anybody want to go there? You think, well, if it's muddy and nasty and tight and crawly, why would I want to go there? Well, that 22-mile cave system that's only 2 miles away, that's why you would go there. Or you'd go to the 22-mile cave system and see if you could go in the opposite direction. And so that would be a cool connection because then that would make what? An over 30-mile long cave system? That's pretty exciting. Yes, let's go map.